You know, it's much easier to write your story in a book and send it off to a publisher than it is to tell the things that have upended you to a crowd of strangers. I maybe know three of you in here, but we're going to lean into this theme of the end of impossible, right? Frederick Buechner once wrote, "My story is important, not because it is mine, but because if I tell it anything like right, you will discover that it is also yours." Not long ago, I was getting ready for brunch. Nashville has some good brunch scenes. And as I was getting into the tub, I slipped. One leg went to the left, the other leg went to the right, hit my head on the wall, and I landed on the cold tile floor. Now, while I knew what was happening had caused me harm, I was deeply humbled to have a body. And I thought for a minute, wow. I may have cursed in that moment too, but we'll say, wow. I have a body and it hurts. And as I began to recover, I began to become curious about how I could become more connected to my body. It was a sharp and painful reminder that I've been living life from the shoulders up. I've become a floating head. You may have said you feel detached. I know I have. And it's meant in emotional terms. Our circumstances, sometimes our biology, can make us feel in a way that we describe as numb, flat, disinterested. But being a floating head is different. It's metaphysical dismemberment. It turns the human experience into a scientific observation. And we learn how deeply disconnected we are in that moment. Each morning I wake up in a body that I do not know, in a body that I cannot feel. And when I wake up, I sit on the edge and I place my feet on the ground and I imagine roots growing out of my feet, connecting with the earth, and then, and only then, am I able to feel my body. But I've not always had this practice. I've seemingly been able to get by just fine, living that Cartesian mind-body separation. You know the phrase, I think, therefore I am. Well, I was my mind. And the world didn't care that I was a floating head. Losing relationship with my body also meant that I lost relationship with my community. And my community was also dismembered as floating heads. And I'm here to say that's a problem. This disembodiment isn't just about me. It's about all of us. How can we be a better body together? Can we learn to be embodied in such a way that we are more knit together, more connected to face the challenges that are before us? Can we imagine another possible future together? You know, I'm a conversationalist when I talk, and so this is the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. I have a hunch why I became a floating head. I'm non-binary transgender, but I was assigned female at birth. I was born to a dark, caramely brown Mexican woman, but my skin tone is not dark brown or caramel. I live life on the autism spectrum, and I can't feel my body unless someone is literally touching me or hugging me. As a child, I was neglected by those who were put on this earth to care for me. One of the things that I have come to realize is that I love devouring information. And I only feel alive when I'm devouring information. One of my favorite things to do when I was a doctoral student was gather together with friends and colleagues at a local cafe or a brew pub. And I decided to take the bus on this day. And as I was waiting at the bus stop, A man who was experiencing some issues, we might say, some mental and emotional disturbances, assaulted me. And there, as the assault was taking place, I could see everything happening around me, as if it was happening to something and not to someone. I knew then how disconnected I was from my body. And while I wasn't inflicting harm on people at bus stops, I was studying this esoteric bullshit that fundamentally disconnected me from my body. I knew then, it was like this intellectual epiphany, and I knew then that I had to figure out how to reconnect with my body. Growing up, or as I think about growing up, the dominant themes that populate my lived story is violence and abandonment. One of my favorite things to do growing up was visiting my white grandparents. They really saved me in a lot of ways. And each summer I would go stay with my white grandparents, and they would tell me that I would collapse for days and sleep. It was my favorite place. And while there, my papa was a school teacher. He went to law school. He left law school to become a farmer. I don't know why. But he gave me this mechanical education. I learned how to change oil on a car. The first thing I ever drove was a John Deere tractor. You probably shouldn't trust me on the streets. But while I was gaining this mechanical education, which I deeply value and don't practice now, I was also subjected to sexual assault at the hands of their farm workers. This place of respite, this favorite place of mine, became the place that encouraged my bodily disconnection. It encouraged living life from the shoulders up. So there's this thing that I learned very early on, that I couldn't trust my body, and that my mind was like the thing that I needed to harness. But my mind couldn't hold everything. At the age of 16, I suffered from an acute intracranial hemorrhage. I had a blood clot the size of an orange. Everybody thinks this thing on my head is a barber design. No, it's a scar that insurance paid about $2 million for. And after I recovered from my brain surgeries, 2 open craniotomies, I graduated high school and I went to college. And I gave up my music scholarship to study the big ideas. And the 3 questions that I was researching as an undergraduate degree, I'm a bit nerdy. Who is God? What does it mean to be human? And what is a body? As the Indigo Girls say, I spent 4 years prostrating to the higher minds. I got my papers, and I got out. And I went on to graduate school. They thought I was gifted. And after graduate school, I went on to the PhD. And there in my PhD program, I happened upon a conversation that graduate school and our culture could disconnect us from our bodies. And I thought to myself, this thing about being disconnected has been the curiosity of my life, landing me here with you today. That was in 2013. I wasn't diagnosed with autism until 2020, after a friend, and when I was in Cuba, said that I should look into some of my particular attributes. So I found myself during the pandemic frantically Googling, how do you know if you're on the autism spectrum as an adult? I found a therapist and had some assessments, and lo and behold, I register as on the autism spectrum. In fact, they had to come and get me from the cello storage unit because I was in the quiet place back there. And looking back, there are a few things that say, yeah, you're a little bit different. Your brain works a little bit different. As a child, my form of playing was stacking rocks in the carport by myself. As a kid and now, I only eat one thing at a time, and I don't like my food to touch. And I can't feel my body unless someone is touching me. So while this autism thing is really important, there was this other thing that I needed to discover and figure out how to suture, which is this thing around attachment. I showed up into my therapist's office in 2015. I was on faculty in Berkeley. And I walked into my therapist's office and I asked her, that first therapy session where you're like getting to know each other, seeing if you're a good fit? That's not how I roll. I just walked into my therapist's office, who I still see today, and I said, how do I have a relationship with my body? That single question turned into a 7-year journey of me exploring myself, my body, my relationships, and the attachment wounds I carry. And I'm surprised to know that these attachment wounds actually show up in society. Did you know that 40% of people have insecure attachments in relationships? And if 40% of people have insecure attachments in relationships, which show up as avoidance, disorganization, and anxiousness, then we also have a lack of attachment in our bodies. And so there are a lot of us floating around, living life from the shoulders up. And if this impact that I am suffering from is also felt in society, how do we suture those wounds? Well, like several of us have said up here, I think we have to get curious. We have to get curious about ourselves and the nature of belonging, and we have to get curious about each other. Can we suture societal wounds? Let me illustrate what I mean when I talk about societal wounds. In 2017, when I was in Charlottesville, Virginia at the Unite the Right rally, I was evacuated by my security detail when neo-Nazis lunged in my direction. And after I was evacuated, I was surprised to see how many people with their guns looked angry and looking at me not as part of their communal body, but as something that should be severed, excised, like an infected limb. It was the violent outpouring of what people experience every day in subtle and not so subtle ways. So this question about suturing our wounds is deep for me. And it's not just about me, but it's about all of us. And if you forget everything I've said, hang on to this. Let us be the healing of the wounds. And this usness is only found in relationship. So this 7-year journey that I've been on has really turned into, how do we be a better body? Can we imagine ethical futures? And so, as I see the time is running out, we could be here for days. I want to say that my job has been to be curious about myself and to be curious about other people. I don't want to belong to a country, to a city, to a group, and certainly not a political party where I don't have belonging. I want to belong first to myself. I don't want to be alien to myself. I want to feel. I want to be connected. And when I am able to do that and suture the attachment wounds that I carry with myself, I'm then able to build community and with each of you, stewarding ethical futures together with a secure attachment in what we might call embodiment. Thank you.